Harvard has found itself at the center of a pitched battle this week with students, alumni, faculty, and staff camping out for what's come to be known as Heat Week. Protesters have set up blockades at Massachusetts Hall, where President Drew Faust's offices are located, and they've been expanding to other areas of campus as well. The goal? To get Harvard to divest. I'll let the demonstrators themselves explain from what.
We wanted to say that it will no longer invest in fossil fuels in the future, and we wanted to reinvest that money in solutions that prioritize people that are at the front lines of climate change.
I think it's just completely irresponsible for Harvard to be investing in an industry that is threatening life on Earth as we know it.
In response, Harvard has released a statement saying, in part, Harvard fully respects the rights of divestment advocates to express their views openly and vigorously. We agree that climate change is a serious problem, but respectfully disagree on the means by which a university should confront it. Of course, Harvard is hardly the first campus to be the site of such a protest. MIT had one last week, as did BC. But Harvard is gaining a lot of attention because of the prominence of the school and the involvement of one grad in particular, Bill McKibben. McKibben's 1989 book, The End of Nature, is seen by many as the catalyst to the anti-global warming, now climate change movement. He's also the leader of the group 350.org, and he joins me now. Bill, good to see you.
Good to be with you, Tim.
And I should say, by the way, we invited President Faust to join us, or a representative, and they declined. Bill, I understand why you thought it important to have hundreds of thousands of people last September in the streets of New York City and around the world, actually, outside the summit of world leaders on climate change of the UN. But why does it matter what Harvard invests in or doesn't invest in?
You know, every once in a while, there's a problem that rises to the level where one has to go to the root. The last time that there was a divestment campaign, it was about apartheid in South Africa. When Nelson Mandela got out of jail, the first trip he took was to the U.S., and he went to California to thank students at the UC system who were one of 155 colleges that had sold their stock in South Africa. He said, "We liberated ourselves, but we couldn't have done it without you." This is one tool among many in this fight against the biggest problem we've ever faced, climate change. And the reason that it's so important is because we've learned in the last few years that the fossil fuel industry has about 4 times as much carbon in its reserves of coal and oil and gas as any scientist thinks we should burn. If they carry out their business plan, the planet tanks.
But even there was a story in the New York Times, which I know you know about, which talked about the Rockefeller Fund of all, divesting from this. And there's a guy from Pitzer College, which has already done this, saying, he says, I don't think anyone who, this is in favor of your cause, who favors divestment is arguing this is going to have much impact, if any, on stock or companies themselves. Harvard, Drew Faust, in a letter to the editor of the Globe the other day, says if we divest, though someone else is going to be ready to buy the exact same stock. So what's the difference?
No one expects that we're going to bankrupt Exxon overnight. What we can do is begin to politically bankrupt them. Remember, the reason that we're in this hole is not because scientists disagree about climate change. They don't. It's because the financial power of this industry has been enough to prevent policy action for a quarter century. We rationally shouldn't have to be doing any of this. In a reasonable world, our leaders would long since have taken on climate change, but the political power of all that money is so great that they haven't been able to.
In that same letter to the editor of the Globe, Faust said they're doing new chemical processes to reduce fossil fuel dependency, helping to shape international climate agreements, reducing their own greenhouse gas emissions 20%. She says, I just have a different route to the same goal. You're not buying it.
All that makes it so crazy that they're also, at the same time, look, last fall, right when the Rockefellers were divesting because they said they'd been unable to get the family company, Exxon, to begin to mend its ways, when they were doing that, Harvard septupled its investments in fossil fuel. The biggest one went to a company called Anadarko Petroleum, which not only announced that they were trying to open 19 or 20 new oil plays this year, i.e. oil that we knew finds that we desperately don't need. They also were giving millions of dollars to people like Jim Inhofe, the chief climate denier. Harvard fights against itself like every other institution when they do this.
I want to talk about Inhofe for a second because you started this battle with End of Nature 25 years ago, but Are you losing it? I mean, on one hand, there's 400,000 people, but let me just say, there are the James Inhofe, and for those who don't know, senator who is the chair of the Environment Committee in the United States Senate, who said climate change is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated in the American people. And while the New York Times is praising Barack Obama potentially as the most accomplished environmental president ever, you don't give him those kind of grades. So are we losing this fight?
Well, no one would say that we're winning in the sense that the Arctic is melting quickly, the ocean's acidifying quickly. Boston knows better than anybody else what happens when you put more water vapor in the air and find downpours or blizzards as the result. But in the last year, something's really begun to shift in the politics of all this. I mean, today, the president of the World Bank, not exactly a radical institution, hailed divestment as an absolutely necessary part of this fight. When you got the World Bank and the Rockefellers and people lining up finally saying the time for change has come, maybe the time for change has come.
Well, so the head of the World Bank has been convinced. Now speak to the people of Massachusetts. Not exactly an unliberal state. A recent poll, a couple of weeks ago, Mass Inc. puts out a poll. 2/3 to 3/4 of the people say, yes, climate change exists and human activity is a major cause, but it's below the economy, below education, below healthcare in terms of priorities to fix. How do you move it up the chain?
On any given day, there's always something more important going on, but on every given day, it's actually in the back the most important thing that humans have ever done. I think the reason that people have a hard time dealing with it is that we seem so small and it seems so large that we want to take our attention to things that we can affect. And the work that we've done in the last few years to build a movement, I think is finally beginning to convince people that not by themselves, by yourself you are fairly powerless against something that's large, but as we come together, we have a shot. That's what's going on at places like Harvard this week.
You don't think it's too late? We have 30 seconds.
It's too late to stop global warming. It's not too late to keep it from getting worse than it has to get. That difference is the difference between a difficult century and an impossible one. It may be the most important thing that human beings have ever done, and that's why, among other things, we hope people will be at the Science Center in front of Harvard Friday at 6 for a big rally. The students are amazing there.
You're not so bad yourself, Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, author of End of Nature and many other wonderful books. Bill, it's good to see you.